Welcome. Today we're going to talk about, we've got a great panel here that we're going to talk about distributed organizations and what that actually looks like within our ecosystem, as well as how it could evolve into more general practice. So I wanted to start out by actually getting a little bit of an audience participation before we get into introductions of who of you in the audience actually work for organizations that are a bit more distributed. And is there anyone in the audience that's actually trying to get more of an idea of concepts of how you would go about doing that? Okay. I would say there's probably on both sides, even if you already have it. How do we really streamline this? So what I wanted to start out by doing is having everyone here kind of go through, introduce yourself, companies you work for, and then how distributed or not are the teams that you work with?
I'm John Paller. I'm the founder of ETHDenver and also the co-founder of Opolis, which is a employment commons framework. Our team is pretty distributed, I would say. We have people all over the US as well as international, so it's pretty complex, for sure.
My name is Jake Brukhman of Coinfund. We're a blockchain-focused investment fund based in New York. Our team is very not distributed. We're all in the same office, but we obviously invest in a large number of companies that take a distributed model or are even doing things like DAOs.
Hey everyone, my name's Wright. I'm the co-founder of OpenLaw. Our team is distributed by design, right? We think that that's the right way to build a team, the right way to find the best talent, and the folks that are really interested in various different projects. So.
Hey everyone, I'm Knab. I run a company called Veriledger. We build cryptocurrency accounting software for businesses. And our team is fully distributed, kind of by happenstance.
Hi, I'm Mariano Conti. I work at the Maker Foundation. And Maker Foundation is pretty much very distributed, even though there are hub offices in 3 or 4 different cities. Almost everybody else, we have 100 people from the 20 different countries, so yeah.
Wonderful, thank you guys. So I would gather that probably most people on the stage have had more traditional workplace situations at some point in your career, is that correct? Is there anyone who hasn't?
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to start actually, Megan, with you, because we had talked about this a little bit earlier. Having had jobs in that manner, that traditional manner that most of us have been used to being in, what is it about having a more distributed workplace that you feel like is most valuable in your eyes?
Yeah, so I think part of it is, we are a software company. We don't meet with clients in person normally, so it gives us flexibility to be able to hire whoever we think is the best fit for our organization. For me, it was mostly about hiring, where can I find the best people to do what I need them to do? And it so happened that they ended up being in different cities around the world. So,
Aaron, the way that your team has been built by design, what was kind of the aha moment for you to go in that direction?
So before I founded OpenLaw, I had the pleasure of working for the for-profit sister project to Wikipedia called Wikia, and we were actually distributed by design off the bat too. Wikipedia, not surprisingly, had folks that were contributing from around the globe. I think that worked out spectacularly well. And I think we learned from that there's talented folks that are really passionate about what you're trying to do that don't necessarily just reside in the same city or location where you are. So I just think that's always inherently made sense. I also think just broadly, if you're developing blockchain technology, it probably should mirror at some level the underlying tech stack to really understand the challenges and opportunities. So that just seemed like a natural fit there too.
Mariano, I have a question for you. With Maker being so distributed, and you are a tech lead, so your team is all over the place. What does that look like for you to lead them on a day-to-day basis and kind of keep them on track?
It's actually a little easier this time. Last year we had 2 people from Europe and people in Argentina, and then in the US in both East and West Coast. That did become complicated because when people in Seattle were waking up, people in Europe were leaving work, right? So that can create some issues. We got really good at asynchronous communication. Now we're just in the Americas, so it's just East and West Coast and Buenos Aires. So, we make do. It's even some form of self-organization where people from similar time zones start working on similar things. It is not always the case, but I've seen it happen, and it just like organically becomes so, like tiny subgroups between the team.
How have the rest of you found that it looks to actually kind of lead your teams and make sure that you're keeping them on track? Have there been certain systems that you've used, tools, anything of that nature to make sure that everyone can really go towards whatever the goal is that they have?
I think first off, it starts with just good project management. I mean, whatever tool you're going to use, if you don't like the sort of centralization of Slack, there's other ways that you can talk. I mean, there's no shortage of like new tech that you can actually use to like set the right appropriate expectations, I guess you could say. If you don't have that, distributed work is terrible. I mean, asynchronous communication is impossible if you don't actually have good documentation and good expectations management. It's literally impossible if you don't do that.
Yeah, maybe just based on like feedback we've gotten from teams, it's like running a distributed organization versus an organization where everyone is in the same place is a kind of trade-off. And maybe like one of the trade-offs is, well, you can cover sort of more space, more time. On the other hand, you tend to lose people who, are bad at like written communication, right? So that's kind of a weird dimension on which to lose a set of prospective employees. And also isolation could be a problem. Like one of our portfolio companies did an interesting thing, which is they said, we're going to be distributed, but we're going to have hubs. We're going to have a New York hub, we're going to have a Berlin hub, and that way members of our organization can still show up to work with coworkers in the same room.
The communication question, I think, is one of the biggest things, because even for companies that are living on the more traditional side, where you see your coworkers, your employees every day, that still can be problematic. So with that in mind, John, as a talent acquisition expert, do you feel like that there are certain traits that employees might need to exhibit at this given time where we are with being able to create really how these distributed systems can work that lends itself well to having employees that do really well and thrive in this environment versus maybe other aspects?
100%. You mentioned, Jake, that you lose people that are maybe not as good at like that linear, sort of like almost call it hierarchical sort of reporting structure, sort of management oversight, sort of typical. In my opinion, 15 years from now, that's dead. It's dead. Why? Autonomy is the new thing, right? Asynchronous work, like different time zones, different work approaches. It's going to be task-based or more, project-based completion. So instead of micromanagement and reporting structures, it's work completed, right? And the path to get there is really what's up for debate. Autonomy is the number one thing that the younger worker generations want. So they want freedom and flexibility. They actually don't work well in micromanagement situations. So if you see what HR groups have done over the past 10 years, they're like, well, how do we engage the millennials? They're lazy and they're entitled and they're this and they're that. And it's like, well, the reality is they're actually pretty productive, but you're managing them in a way that they just don't work well because they don't like to be managed that way. So giving them the freedom to own, so the ownership mentality is really the correlative to the autonomy. And that's the new way of work. So if we don't do that, or if you don't do that as an organization and empower people to make good decisions and to do their jobs, it's trouble.
Maybe if I could comment on that, like on your sort of thoughts on the innovation of corporate structures. Like if you do a thought experiment, I don't actually know the answer to this, but like let's say it's 1950 and we want to do Maker across continents. Like the only tool we have to coordinate our team is the phone. it's not impossible to do that, but I'm not sure that like that's a good way of doing it. And so when you start to think about distributed teams, this is really a phenomenon that happened once you had like very cheap global telecommunication tools. And if you think about that, that's only like 20 years old, maybe like 10 years old. So what we're sort of in the middle of is this innovation of corporate structures just on the basis of technology innovating, and it's a very, very new phenomenon, and no one really like planned for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is interesting to think about. John, I wanted to actually touch on something else that you just brought up, because I think one of the things is, as we were talking about earlier, this is early days of all of this too, and I think that how we've as humans have understood how our workplace environments look, this is starting to evolve. I think that the blockchain tech industry has most definitely lent itself very well to this, because especially the earlier days, and arguably still today, your talent pool as far as maybe development talent, other talent, is going to be few and far between. So you really do want to pull people from wherever they exist. You brought up that this is going to start to be more task-based, and people will be able to know, I need to do this, this, and this. Where I want to counter that is, do you feel like there might be some problems too with younger workers that also are very mission-driven? They need to know, these tasks I'm doing, what are they? What is the outcome? What am I contributing to? How do we keep that communication open so that there is alignment and there's a consistent basis for, you're doing task A, B, C, and D, and at the end of the day, this is what it's going to contribute to towards this larger mission?
So, is this working? Yeah, it works. I would say that it's a little bit more complicated than this. That this is sort of framing it in the traditional sort of relationship of employment. So our entire project is about the self-sovereignty of employment and the new way of even relationships of employment. So the legal contract between worker and corporation today is very paternalistic. Task, 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 you got to do these things, and it's sort of, I refer to it, might be not the right word, but it's sort of a mercenary mindset, right? Like, it's a means to an end, it's my paycheck, I've got to do these things to get paid. There's no purpose behind it, there's no passion behind it. One of the other things that exists in the youngest population, one of the major drivers behind why they don't want to tether themselves to a full-time job, 53% of them being full-time freelancers already, is they don't believe in what the companies believe in. So they look at their parents and they go, they're not happy. I don't want to do that. That's not the life that I want, being up to my eyeballs in debt and, having a lifestyle that's sort of cookie cutter. Like, they're just not interested in that. So I think task-based work is a thing. I think it's, high frequency of work too, so I can do a bunch of different things, but I think you are absolutely right that with transparency comes choice. And now, especially with opportunities being more fluid, people are absolutely going to align themselves with work that aligns with themselves. So corporations, or service consumers, if you will, they're gonna have to up their game in providing something more than just a paycheck. They're going to have to provide something more aligned with the purpose and values of the individual, or else they're just going to bounce onto the next thing. So the competitive landscape for talent is moving from the ability to get a check sustainably in the context of safety and security, and it's moving to freedom, flexibility, and values.
I will say on the flip side of it, less from the talent management perspective, and more from who are we serving? We work with some Wall Street companies. We are a distributed team, but we still have to conform to the industry and the people that we're trying to service. So every day, 9:15, we're checking trades coming through. So there's you want to provide flexibility for sure, but you also have to still respect the structures. If we're really into penetrating more traditional industries, we still have to figure out how to conform while providing flexibility. So I think sometimes remote work actually makes it easier, because if you have people in Europe taking early morning New York orders, it's better. than having somebody get up at 7, something like that. So.
Well, with that being said, depending on your clients, do you all feel that having these distributed teams, is this going to be something that is just going to be common for everyone? Or is there going to be some industries in which maybe this doesn't make as much sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jake made a great point before, but in many ways, organizations just reflect the underlying technology. So in the 1950s, it wasn't possible to have really remote work. With the internet and also, I would say, increases in bandwidth so we could get video conferencing. I think that's the trend. I think broadly what the blockchain industry is going to bring is not just efficiencies when it comes to communication, but also some of the less exciting but important operational aspects of it, right? So when it's easy to hire somebody, when it's easy to pay somebody, the costs of creating that organization go down. That means you're going to see a future where you can pull capital, pull people together, make sure that they're paid, make sure that the back end is kind of all handled. Whether that takes 10 years or 50 years, I think is a big open question, but I think that's the vision of where things are going, which is pretty exciting.
Aaron, actually, I have a question for you, kind of going into some of the layers
stuff.
of where are we? So I think that, we've got different regulatory things to keep in mind, like if we're talking about HR, compliancy, security. How do you handle maybe the benefits that you might have for an employee that's in one state to the next, one country to the next? How do you see that from the legal perspective? How is that evolving? Where are we right now with those types of systems, and where do you see that moving?
I mean, on the tech side, I think we're doing some pretty amazing stuff. We've demonstrated, and other folks have done this too, you can pay people in real time if they're all in crypto. We've actually done a proof of concept where you can pull taxes automatically. So the government can collect taxes in real time as people are getting paid. Part of this broader concept that value can kind of flow like water. The laws catch up, right? So if folks want to do things, at least in the US, and it's reasonable and sensible, and usually the laws will meander their way to that endpoint. So I think there are some challenges, though, but those regulatory challenges also create software opportunities and ways to kind of build additional tooling that may manage some of that complexity.
And Megan, talk a little bit about that side for you. Like, I know that you've seen that with some of your clients, some of the issues there, but I'd love to hear
totally.
more.
I think that just one of the things, we have seen progressive regulatory, steps forward in the United States. Sometimes I would say we run into tension between state level, sort of like you're a Vermont BBLLC or you're something else, and the federal sort of compliance that you have to do doesn't really, jive with that. So I think one of the, specialties that at least I have, and I think I would presume to say Aaron has with OpenLaw, is figuring out how to translate what's going on in the entrepreneurial environment and how you guys want to build businesses to sort of, the what exists to be compliant now. And we're getting closer every day, but there's still a little disconnect there in my opinion.
Yeah. Mariano? Ready? Are you ready?
I'm hearing a lot about that. The good thing about being down in Argentina is that I can still tell people to just use DAI and say fuck you to the government, and and I'm gonna keep doing it as long as I can, which might not be long. I know that, like you say, regulation catches up to everybody. I know that stuff used to be possible here. It might not be that way anymore, but there's still lots of places where people can feel a sense of empowerment, but just saying we've been screwed over for so long. And, these technologies, they give us a chance to screw them back, or maybe just take ownership of our, our own life, our own financial destiny. And so, I don't know, it's interesting that we're already discussing. I try not to think about regulation, and even though there's probably 20 people at the foundation that's their job, right? Yeah. I want to not think about that for as long as I can, actually.
It's understandable.
Yeah.
Aaron, how do you feel about that?
No, I think you're that's admirable. I would say, particularly in the U.S., we're very pragmatic. So the pragmatism just tends to win, right? So people want to move in a certain direction. It's kind of deep-rooted that we'll figure out the path there. And people will argue about it, and it could be ugly and gruesome and confusing, but ultimately we have paths forward. I mean, just look at the token economy. We're pushing slowly towards what that looks like. I imagine we'll get to the same point for stablecoins. I think we'll get to the same point for DAOs, and if there's other issues that pop up, just sensible heads tend to prevail here, despite what you may read in the headlines. Most folks are pretty reasonable people.
So getting it back into kind of a bit more of like, what does the day-to-day look like? I know, we're creating things and systems and new, very new technology. And when you're in more nascent industries, there is the need to be creative and to be collaborative and to have moments where you need to problem solve as a unit. So how do you go about doing that without being able to pull people in a room?
Hackathons?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, aren't we doing that right now? I think there's, for every successful distributed organization that I've seen, there's probably a half a dozen yearly convergences. The people element has to stay in place. I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe that that's going to change either. Like, it's sort of a human component, right? Like, we thrive in community. I mean, if you're going to do it collaboratively, if you're going to really focus on collaboration, expression of creativity, it's not going to be about just zero-sum competition. And having your freedom and flexibility is great, but it also gets lonely, and you sort of need that human connection. And if you're not doing that, eventually people get disconnected from back to the purpose, right? So I think it's really important that people are intentional about getting physically together on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think you covered it quite well, and just sort of like thinking about distributed organizations we've seen is there's always yearly on-sites that reinforce the mission. Maybe the thing to add is like, how expensive is that? Like, how much of a cost is that for an organization versus the benefit that they get by being distributed? Would be one issue I'd want to think through as like an investor in such a company.
Yeah, for all of you, what has been the biggest challenge with kind of curating the environment for your companies?
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
I was just gonna say the biggest challenge for me is like I'm always awake, because I wake up early to like talk to people on the West Coast and then late at night, So it's just like, I think, as mentioned before, like the more you plan ahead to be able to like have a 24/7 operation is great, but I'm just awake all the time, so that's the only bad thing I would say.
Time zones, right? We went through something similar to Maker where we extended pretty far out in the time zones, and that was challenging just to get the async communication to work pretty well. So we kind of tightened the bands of where we're going to look for folks for remote. And then also, I think you do have to do a lot of writing. I don't mind that, being natively a lawyer, but I think that's critically important. Just documentation and being able to express yourself in written form is really important for remote first teams, I think.
I will also say personally that when you have so many people around the world and doing something like DAI, which we want it to be a global decentralized stablecoin, you sometimes feel that you can attack all those countries all at once just because, I don't know, you have one person there and it's like, okay, I already got the in and they're gonna know everything about their country, even though it's like you cannot peg one person, for representing a whole country. I mean, not even a city, not even maybe a city block, So that divide is interesting, and it's like, yeah, we have 4 people in Buenos Aires, right? But maybe that's not even enough to say, okay, we know enough about the city or the country to try to like take on this place next. So, yeah, I don't know. That's something that I always felt interesting, and I don't know if that's me or if it's like a common concern.
Yeah. Have you found, so your team in Argentina, do you guys regularly get together? Are you regularly working at the same?
We're 2 developers, a community dev and a biz dev. So I mostly only get together with the other dev so we can code together, but then we do monthly meetups with the whole Ethereum community there. So that's when, yeah, we see each other. But I think I see some of the team more, the international team just coming to hackathons that sometimes some people from, that work maybe 20 blocks from me. Yeah.
So I want to kind of start to wrap this up a little bit and really dive into how do you guys feel, where do you feel like we are right now with creating these kind of distributed structures? And what are the biggest things that we're really going to have to solve to make this more of a mainstream use case?
I have an answer to that. I think that we have to think about the two sides of the thing that we're trying to build. The technology that we're building is decentralized, but the legal frameworks that we build are highly centralized. So, we've got this sort of tension happening between the two, and I think that we're going to see a huge boom in cooperatives. And they're not going to be your, old school 1960s cooperatives for ag sort of supply chain stuff. We're going to see high frequency digital cooperatives that have governance layers, legal contracts, all sorts of different components that are baked into a single UX. And you're going to have a whole different legal relationship that emerges out of this that allows for a much more flexible sort of employment dynamic. So I think we talk a lot about tech in the blockchain space, but a lot of the problems that we're solving actually aren't tech problems. They're coordination problems that are solved by tech, or they're human problems we're trying to solve by tech. But then there's this really, 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 really unfun thing called legal. And Aaron deals with this all the time.
Guys, are you guys picking on lawyers? Is this what I'm hearing?
No.
That's fine. I'm very happy to pick on lawyers.
Unfun for me. I'll just speak for myself.
Listen, there's too many lawyers. We all know that, right? Particularly
not doing
in the US.
what you do.
Yeah. Well, that's the point,
enough
right?
Aaron Wrights.
Yeah, but there should be less lawyers, and everything would be better.
For me, I'm saying this more as quite frankly, the work that you're doing, praise be, dude. Because seriously, I don't have I probably don't even have the intelligence for it because it's that complicated. But the net end of this is the convergence of the digital and the legal create a new, call it employment contract construct that allows for this high fluidity of work and this new worker dynamic that supports freedom, flexibility, and purpose, and actually then supports this tech that we're trying to build. That's, I think, the hardest work that we have to do. So call it the legal protocol. Needs a little bit of work. I mean, you're doing a bunch of work on Loud, and we're doing a bunch of work in co-ops, and there's a bunch of other things happening that are I call it the ugly underbelly of the things that we just have to do. It's not sexy work, but it's the things that are going to make it go.
Can I talk about this, or can I jump in here? So I work in accounting, and people think it's not sexy or it's boring or whatever, and it's totally not true. Back office processes are so important, and in business school they just they teach you how do you make employees engage, what are different strategies, how do you get business units to work together. Literally the technology that you guys are building is the solution to that problem. So I feel that's the precipice, but also I told the story to Aaron once. I used to work at a Wall Street firm. I was a budget analyst, and I uncovered this multi-million-dollar fraud. And that's why I started Veriledger, because I was you can automate all this stuff and then you don't have these problems. So it's really sometimes the most boring things that maybe you don't have subject matter expertise in, they have the biggest impact. And if you can start figuring out how to change some of those fundamental structures for how you run businesses, it can have a huge impact. So that's what I'm passionate about. But
Thank you. I think we're out of time, guys, but thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a good rest of ETHDenver.